I have an incredibly important video for you today. Every single person who's trying to get better at Warhammer needs to pay attention. There are 10 rules mistakes that people are making constantly, and it's costing you games. These are little errors in understanding or little errors in wordings that you're not quite grasping. So I'm going to fix all of these for you today. Why does this stuff matter? Well, listen, guys, 10th edition is the most streamlined version of Warhammer, but there are some rules that are worded a little interestingly, and it leads to certain mistakes that you see even veteran players make over and over again. If you need proof of that, just look at the streaming tables of any major out there, and you're always going to see popular top players getting rules wrong. So I'm going to make sure that these things are knocked out right now. So the number 10 thing that people get wrong: out of phase interactions. You're going to have stratagems and abilities that let you act outside of normal phases. So example, if you're shooting during your opponent's turn, this could be as simple as an Overwatch, but you can only do what's normally allowed in that phase. There's a certain wording in Warhammer 40,000 that I absolutely despise, and I hope they get rid of. And it is as if, but not actually. So you'll see different wordings where it's like, hey, this counts as a normal move, but it's not really a normal move. And this can cause lots and lots of confusions. So Overwatch is going to be one of those examples. It's as if you're shooting as if it's your shooting phase, but it's not your shooting phase. So if you were to Overwatch with an ability that only procs during your shooting phase, the ability doesn't proc. A great example of this would be the Infernus Marines ability to cause a battle shock at -1 when they shoot an opponent. So off of an Overwatch, they have torrent weapons. They auto hit with the torrent weapons. They roll their wound rolls as normal, but their ability very specifically says you only activate the battle shock with a -1 when you're shooting in your shooting phase, and it is not your shooting phase, so you're not able to utilize this ability when you Overwatch. Other people will have like if it's the Sisters of Silence, the Witch Seekers with the Flamers, they have the same ability. They cause battle shocks when they shoot, but their rule is worded differently. It doesn't say in your shooting phase. It says each time this unit shoots, which means it would activate on Overwatch. So that can be very confusing, and this type of out of phase interaction happens all the time. This is also a reason why you can't Overwatch with, say, like pistols, right? Because if you're engaged and someone charges you with pistols, you can't Overwatch or whatever, or you can't Overwatch using big guns never tired. That would be a better example. So if you have a monster that is engaged in combat and someone wants to charge that monster, they can't Overwatch, even though if it was their shooting phase, they would be allowed to shoot. It is not their shooting phase. It is your opponent's charge phase or your opponent's movement phase, meaning big guns never tire doesn't work because that rule only applies during your shooting phase. So check your out of phase interactions and try not to be confused by them, even though it can be hard, and I definitely feel for you. Split fire errors. I see this one all the time. When you're going to allocate attacks from a unit, all attacks are going to be allocated at the exact same time. So if you were to select your gladiator, or I'm sorry, your repulsor executioner to shoot 3 different targets, you have to declare which guns go into which units. Or if you were to select, say, your gladiator or your repulsor executioner to shoot 1 target, you have to declare all of the guns into that target all at once. So if you kill your target on the first gun, all the other weapons will be wasted. This is a very, very important thing. A really common mistake is that people will roll first and then decide targets. So be like, I'm just going to go ahead and shoot my, onslaught Gatling cannon here. All right, I shot that unit. Now I'm going to shoot my laser destroyer turret over here. No. You have to select them all at the beginning. This means that you can waste one-shot weapons. So if I have a Vindicator and I'm shooting my Vindicator battle cannon at an opponent, I would have to declare that and my once per game Hunter Killer at the same time. Even if I kill him with my Storm Bolter before I even shoot the Vindicator battle cannon, the Hunter Killer will be then wasted. So you have to announce every weapon's target before rolling. Number 8, objective control miscounts. People very often get confused on exactly how much OC they have on an objective. So players tend to forget OC modifiers, which can come from auras or debuffs or battle shocks. This is a very, very common error. You always double check OC after modifiers are applied. And here's the deal. You 100% can count OC to multiple objectives. So if I have a gladiator lancer right here, as I do in the picture, that lancer is touching 2 different objectives. The lancer has an OC value of 3, which means the player who controls the gladiator lancer will have 3 OC on each objective. Another really important thing to understand about, let's see, objective control modifiers, and we're going to get into modifiers in just a moment, trust me, is that modifiers are applied in a very specific order. So you always would do modifiers, division modifiers, multiplication modifiers, addition modifiers, and subtraction modifiers. So if you are divided, if your OC is, say, 2, and you fail your battle shock test, so you go to 0, well, you still would get to add +1 OC if you have a +1 modifier. So take Sanguinary Guard, for example. They have an OC of 1, but when they have a Sanguinary Banner, that gives them +1 to their OC. So if they get battle shocked, their OC is set to 0, but then they're still add +1 OC, which means even though they're battle shocked, they'll still have an effective OC of 1. This is absolutely the way it is, and I'll show you the rule in just a moment when we get to the modifier slide. Number 7, pile-ins and consolidates. This one is probably the most common error I actually see people make, and I'm going to drop some stuff for you right now. On pile-ins and consolidations, each 3-inch move must end closer to the closest enemy. And you have to base if you can. Common mistakes is using these moves to slingshot units illegally. I say illegally, but I know it's not intentional. It's just people... This could be a little challenging for people to grasp. So here's what we're going to fix. We're going to measure carefully. Every single model must move legally. Here's how you're going to do it. You're going to use this ability to screw up your opponent's consolidations and pile-ins. So in this particular picture I have here, I'm actually just going to make this a little bit bigger while I describe what's going on. We have a unit of orc knobs that have charged a 3-man squad of Sanguinary Guard. I then heroically intervened with the Sanguinor. If you look at this picture, every single orc knob in this picture is closer to the Sanguinor than it is to the Sanguinary Guard, except for one, and that would be the one that is base to the Sanguinary Guard right here. Now, when the orc knobs pile in, they all have to pile in towards the closest enemy model, meaning even this guy right here who could pile in to get into range of the Sanguinary Guard, he can't because he has to end closer towards the Sanguinor. So now what happens when these knobs pile in? Only one knob will be able to fight the Sanguinary Guard. This is what happens when you understand the way pile-ins and consolidates actually work. Trust me, it's really important to grasp this, and once you do, your gameplay is going to be way better. Number 6, coherency mistakes. Units must remain within 2 inches horizontal or 5 inches vertical of coherency. If it is a 6-man squad or less, you got to be within 2 inches of one model. If you are a 7-man squad or more, you must be within 2 inches of 2 models. Overstretching units will break this rule. It is very important to understand that if a model cannot move to restore coherency, it cannot move. So for example, if we look at this unit right here, this is one unit of orc boys, and this one guy on the left of the Sanguinor here is far out of coherency because there's 7 models. Because he cannot pile in such a way that will restore coherency to the unit, because he would have to base the Sanguinor if he was to do so, then this unit's coherency cannot be restored. It cannot move. You cannot move when you cannot restore coherency, which is a big problem. It's something that doesn't happen very often, but it's super important to recognize. Okay? Number 5, fights first fights normally. I'm going to break down how this works. In 10th edition 40k, we have the fights first box, and we have the fights normally box. There is no fights last anymore. In the fights first step of the fights phase, every single unit that gets fights first gets to activate in an alternative way. So that means every unit that you charged in your turn, because you'll get fights first when you charge, and every unit that the opponent has that has fights first. So if you're charging your unit that has fights first into your opponent's unit, who maybe it's a Judici or Leading Blade Guard vets, and they have fights first, they actually will activate first. And you're going to alternate back and forth until all fights first units have completed combat. And remember, you as the charger, every unit that charged gets the fights first rule. Then, once every fights first unit has fought, you move into the fights normal step, which is also alternating, and it still starts with the non-active player, so if there's any ongoing fights, your opponent or the inactive player will be the one to select the first of the fight's normals. This is really, really important to understand. Some people still don't grasp the idea of a fight's first unit charging a fight first unit and why your opponent gets to activate first. So there you have it. Number 4, eligibility to fight. Units can only fight if they charge this turn, and then they can still pile in. They are in engagement range. That's it. That's really the only two ways. So this just came up in a coaching match that I was doing yesterday, so I thought I'd share this scenario with you. So there were 6 Blade Guard veterans engaged with Bellicor and the Keeper of Secrets. My Greater Unclean One charged the Blade Guard veterans, only killed one, but what my opponent did is he killed the one model that was engaged with Bellicor. So now Bellicor will not be able to fight, because when Bellicor is selected, after the Greater Unclean One finishes activating, this one Blade Guard vet, I just flipped him upside down for visual purposes for you guys. Bellicor is no longer in engagement. And he didn't charge this turn, which means he's not eligible to fight anymore, which means only the Keeper of Secrets will get to fight. So you can use this to pull people out of engagement and make them uneligible to fight. Stratagem, wording, and timing. And this is probably the second biggest mistake that I see people make. People misread the timing windows on stratagems. So for example, Armor of Contempt, your opponent's shooting phase or the fight phase just after an enemy unit has selected its targets. So what does this mean? You use this after the enemy unit has selected its targets in your opponent's shooting phase or the fight phase. So you can't do it in your shooting phase. So if it's your shooting phase and an opponent has a stratagem that lets them shoot back at you, you can't armor a contempt against it. You can't armor a contempt against overwatches, and you cannot armor a contempt against fight on deaths, because in a fight on death, the unit is not selecting you as the target. It's just the individual models. So this is a big deal, and you really, really carefully have to read the wording and the timing on your stratagems. Then number 2, modifiers and dice interactions. Now this is one of the ones that really confuses people the most. So buckle in, because I'm going to take a little bit longer on this one to really explain how all of this works. Modifiers, according to the core rules, are going to be anything that changes the numerical value from one value to another. This could include the result of a dice roll, the characteristics of a model, and more. So this could be, hey, a +1 to hit is a modifier. A +1 to damage is a modifier, for example. All right, now here's the rules on applying modifiers in Warhammer 40,000. And seriously, don't be worried if this has confused you, because it confuses lots of people, and we're going to make sure no one is ever confused again. First step, all modifiers will always be cumulative, meaning they will always stack. If a rule instructs you to change or replace one characteristic with a specified value, change the relevant characteristics to the new value before applying any modifiers that apply from other rules to the new value. So what this means in practice is when we take that example of the Sanguinary Guard who have OC1 and they have a Sanguinary Banner which gives them +1 OC, if they were to get battle shocked, you would set their OC to 0, but then you would still add the +1 modifier, so they will still have an OC of 1 even though they happen to be battle shocked. That's in practice what that would mean. Now, you must apply your modifiers in a very specific order, which is you apply division modifiers first, then multiplication modifiers, then addition modifiers, and then finally subtraction modifiers. Let me explain how all of this works. We're going to use damage to explore this, okay? So let's say that I have a Satan, a Nightbringer Satan. He applies a modifier to all damage coming into him where he will have the damage, minimum damage 1. So if you have a Melta weapon, right, and a Melta weapon has a damage profile of D6. The Melta also has a damage modifier that only applies if you are within half range of the weapon. So let's say that we have a Melta, and it's an 18-inch gun, and you're shooting from 8 inches away. Well, you will have a damage characteristic of D6. So you would roll that D6, and then you would have whatever that is. So let's say you roll a 6 for the damage, you'll cut that in half, and the damage will then be 3 for the Satan. But since you are within half range, you will have a +2 damage modifier. This +2 damage modifier is an additive modifier, which will be stacked onto the interaction after the division modifier, not before. So it's damage 6 cut in half to damage 3, +2, final damage will be damage 5 going into the Satan. That is the way it will always work. Now, where people get confused is they think that the +2 on a Melta is not a modifier. Let me give you an example of when this would not be a modifier. So if you have something like, I know, a Caladius Gravity Tanks weapon, which has a damage profile of D6 +2, that is the damage characteristic. So if you rolled a 6, the damage would be 8. You would cut that in half. The final damage would be 4. The +2 in that scenario would not be a damage modifier. That would just be the damage characteristic. The reason why it's a modifier in the Melta scenario is because the damage characteristic of the Melta weapon is D6. You will add 2 damage if like a very specific scenario is fulfilled, which is you are within half range of the Melta gun. So that's the difference there. One more example of how this modification thing will work. Let's say that we have the Infernal Master for the Thousand Suns, and he has an enhancement which gives him +1 damage. And he is going to be shooting his weapon at a unit, let's say Deathwing Knights, which have a rule that give them -1 damage. So the Infernal Master, a 1 damage weapon, +1 to the damage, takes it to damage 2 against the Deathwing Knights. But the damage for the Deathwing Knights, which is -1 damage, is a subtraction modifier, which will be applied after the addition modifier. So the Infernal Master goes from damage 1 to damage 2, back down to damage 1 from the Deathwing Knights damage modifier. That is the correct order to apply modifiers. And remember, you round any fractions up after applying all modifiers. So, like if you were to have, say, like a half damage, like your modifier is a half damage, and you're playing into a las cannon. The las cannon shoots you and hits you with 7 damage. Well, when you have it, you round up to damage 4, not damage 3. So that's the way that works. Now, there is one last thing I'm going to mention on this modifier thing, because I don't want to confuse people, because yes, they are all cumulative, but there are limits on certain types of modifiers. So hit roll modifiers, so +1 to hit roll, or -1 to the hit roll, or +1 to the wound roll, or -1 to the wound roll, you can only ever modify that by 1 in total. So if I have a ballistic skill of 3 and I'm +1 to hit, I am now hitting you on a 2. You can have 2 different things that are at the same time adding +1 to hits, but I'm still only going to be hitting on 2s. I'm never going to be hitting on 1s. Now, where having multiple +1 hit modifiers can come into play is if my opponent also has a -1 to hit modifier. So let's say, for example, I'm a Lancer and I have the heavy keyword. I didn't move, so that's giving me I hit on a 3, but I have a +1 hit modifier. My opponent is a tank and they use the smoke keyword, which gives them -1 to be hit. Then I'm hitting on a 3. Now, if I happen to have 2 different +1 modifiers, I know this can get confusing. I could be taking for myself from ballistic skill of 3 up to hitting on a 2 because of the +1 to hit modifier, -1 to hit, but if I have a second +1 to hit, then I'll go back to being hitting on 2s. So you can do things like that. So this is modifiers. Now, lastly, let's finally, for the number 1 error, is mission and secondary scoring errors. People all the time forget to read their primary and their secondary missions. They forget to hear wording, when something is scored, when something is not scored, when it can be denied, when it cannot be denied. So for example, if we read the terraform action, 1 or more units from your army, each within range of a different objective marker that is not within your deployment zone. End of the turn, if the unit performing this action is still within the range of the same objective marker, you control that objective marker. If completed, it is terraformed. And if your opponent completes it, that objective is no longer terraformed. Now, you can terraform in turn 1, but you can't score it until the second battle round onwards, because it says second battle round onwards, end of the command phase, or end of your turn if this is the 5th battle round. The player whose turn it is scores for each objective marker they control. Sorry, that's the primary. Second battle round, end of the turn is what I meant to be reading. Forgive me if that confused you. So terraform action, second battle round onwards, at the end of the turn, you score 1 victory point for each terraformed objective. So what this means is I can terraform in turn 1, I just can't score for my terraformed objectives in turn 1. I cannot score until turn 2. So make sure you read the timings on all of your cards, because this is probably the biggest scoring mistakes that people in the game make. So there you go, guys. Here are my closing thoughts. These are the top 10 rule mistakes I see constantly in 10th edition. Take these to heart, learn from them. You're going to have much better games. And don't worry if you ever make a mistake here or there. Tons of people make it. You see tons of top players on stream make mistakes on these things. They can be very confusing. But fix these mistakes up. It's instantaneously going to make your games cleaner and fairer and honestly just better in general. If I missed any of them, what is the most common mistake you see in the game? I want you to drop it in the comments down below. And don't forget, you can always join my Discord for coaching and deeper rules talk. So Links are in the description down below. Until next time, everybody, crump on. Bye-bye.